Let's start off with the basics. Lisa Sherwood grew up in a quiet town. The people of the village were kind, and the elders helped settle their disputes and keep the old traditions alive. Lisa was particularly fond of the charms they taught her to draw for safety and for good fortune. One night, as she was walking home through the woods, a terrible storm struck without warning. In the slick, wet darkness, she lost her footing and struck her head. Slipping in and out of consciousness, she watched dark shapes approach between the trees. When they were close enough for her to make out their evil, hungry grins. They kept her chained to the wall in a flooded cellar. Through the gloom, she could see others, whose open wounds swarmed with flies. They did not survive long once the cannibals began carving bites from their bodies with their rusted blades. But somehow Lisa persisted. Starved and mutilated, her gaunt arms became loose in their shackles. She pulled, and the metal tore through skin and muscle until she was free. Her flesh oozed vicious yellow pus, and bones were visible beneath gangrenous wounds. She could go no further. Delirious, she thought of home. She thought of the elders. She traced the symbols they had taught her. A dark hunger stirred inside her. It yearned for blood. She chose vengeance. The police search eventually brought them to the old house in the swamp. Its inhabitants had been dismembered and devoured. The elders' charms were scrawled in blood on the floor. Lisa's body was never found. As for her power, doesn't really describe herself well. The source of Hag's power, a blackened finger used as a catalyst for her terrible power. The hag bends and shapes mud to her will. With simple ritualistic drawings, she creates deceitful duplicates of herself made from mud and decay, which she can use for various effects. Grants the ability to create and maintain 10 phantasm traps. Grants the ability to instantly travel to triggered phantasm traps when within a 40-meter range. Baseline. What this actually means in-game is that you use your power by drawing these triangle shapes on the ground. Within a certain range of these triangle-shaped traps, if a survivor walks or runs over them, it will trigger, setting off the trap. Now, by default, a copy of Lisa will spawn on the spot where the trap is set off. It'll look like whatever skin you're using. So, like, as a default, it'll look like this, with no charms or anything. So, survivor sets off the trap. This image, or the image of whatever skin you're using, is what will pop up, make a large noise, and pull the survivor's camera towards the center of the trap. This is a key thing that is not mentioned in her power, is that it does have that camera flick. It's a very, very important part of her power that's not listed at all in the description. As the killer, as Lisa or the hag, what you see is a white phantasm pop up on screen, clean through walls, wherever the survivor has triggered the trap. If you have line of sight to the phantasm, it won't be white, it will just look like a copy of yourself. You can then use your ability to teleport to where that phantasm is, taking its place. Now, something key to note is that when you teleport, there's no visual difference between a phantasm and when you are physically there. To the survivor, they are identical. There is no animation difference between whether it's a phantasm or when you take that position. So until the survivor sees the phantasm move towards them or vanish, they have no way of knowing whether or not you were actually there. At least until the heartbeat from the terror radius kicks in. But there's some interesting things about that too. That being said, though, let's get into the rest of the guide. Coming up next, we have examples of the various types of hag traps that can be used in the game. Starting with a standard tile trap is simply a trap placed in a predetermined place within a standard tile. Then you have map-specific tile traps, which are, as they sound, traps that are specific to specific maps. Next, you have hook traps. It's just a simple trap placed at a hook underneath a trapped survivor, allowing you to punish a rushed unhook. Follow that, you have a gen trap. You always want to place the trap on the side of the gen that will cover the most area. Like so. Now you have blind traps. Blind traps are traps that are impossible to see from the appropriate angle until you've already set them off. These are perfect against skilled survivors because they won't know what's happened until they've already hit it. Now, heat traps. Heat traps are any trap placed in a commonly traveled area, but not necessarily within a tile. Channel traps. Channel traps are traps you place that will actually redirect a survivor in the direction you want them to go. Now, if he was getting hit here, he would probably travel with the distance as well. Pallet traps are rarely used, but it is a trap placed within the drop of a pallet so that as the survivor hits the trap, they're unable to actually drop the pallet, thus guaranteeing you the hit. Typically, if they do drop the pallet, they are dropping the pallet after they've already been struck, so they're wasting their speed boost and you get a free pallet out of it. Lure traps. Lure traps are used against flashlights and against experienced survivors where you place one trap while chasing, which would be this one, and then once you break line of sight, you place a second one. So when they come back to break the first trap, they hit the second one. Corner traps are, as they pretty much sound like, the trap placed in the corner to pull the camera directly in the corner. Do not work with shackles, obviously. Now, heat traps. Heat traps are the hardest thing to explain, the most important thing about being good at Hag. So Aces here is pretending to be on that generator, and behind us we have designated a hook to be a hook that a survivor was on, just for the purposes of a demonstration. Now I've placed a single trap in a location that is usually useless. But as you will see when Aces goes to try and come for the save, despite the fact he knows I'm Hag, despite the fact he's been instructed to try to avoid any of my traps, and despite the fact he's been playing this with me for about a week or two doing recording, he still hits the trap. Because I'm able to predict the path he will choose to take, knowing I am Hag, making the attempt to avoid me. Heat traps are the single most important part of being good at Hag, because you have to be able to predict a survivor's movement even outside of traditional pathways. Learn to do that, and you will scare people endlessly. Okay, coming up next, we have the standard trap setting speed and the standard distance that a Hag can teleport without add-ons, which is 40 meters. Now, there are 3 types of add-ons that increase her trap setting speed and range. Brown, yellow, and green for range go from 48 to 50 to 52 meters, making range add-ons Hag's strongest add-ons even as a brown. The increase of 20% is not to be underestimated. As you can see, you get, even with just a brown add-on, the distance gain is considerable. And then here's the setting speed increases with the yellow and green as well. Now, duration add-ons are less impactful at lower tiers, but they do go up rather quickly. Unfortunately, we're not able to demonstrate the trap trigger radius add-ons because as of the time of making this guide, they're currently non-functional, along with Disfigured Ear and Grandma's Heart. When they are re-enabled or working correctly, I will do an updated video including their use so to show them off. Now this is just Waterlogged Shoe's base movement speed increase. It actually makes you a 114.5% speed killer. Now here's the same add-on, but actually using the traps, which cause a 9% hindered effect. And you can see the amount of distance you would gain is rather drastic. So this is what you would use as Chaser Hag. Now here you have the Aura Reading add-on and Mint Rag, which allows you to choose any trap on the map that is active or not, whether it's been triggered or not, and teleport to it at unlimited range. It does have a cooldown. Unfortunately, there is no cooldown indicator, but you can see I'm sitting here pressing the button again and again and again, and it takes quite a bit before I'm allowed to move again. Here we have the green Aura Reading add-on, followed by Body Blocker Hag. Now, Hag can actually move over her own add-on, or her own traps when blocked, but Survivor, as you can see, cannot. Now, Rusty Shackles are one of her more powerful add-ons. As you can see, they give no indication to the Survivor that they've been set off, but you're still capable of teleporting to them. They're phenomenal for grabs. Now, here we're going to have an entire list of various trap placements for all of the standard tiles on every map, such as TNL walls, along with all of the map-specific traps like drop-downs on Coal Tower, where you would trap on Larry's, things like the game, what have you. There is very little to commentate on this, so I will leave you with some music. Do keep in mind with all of the trap placements that you are seeing and about to see, you do not have to use all of these traps every time you play. These are simply the most optimal place to place traps on these given maps. So keep that in mind. Also, anytime you see me trap between a window and a doorway, obviously if the window spawns on the opposite side, adjust your trap accordingly. Okay, welcome to the section of the guide that will be talking about perks and where they kind of sit for Hag. Luckily, they're in alphabetical order, and we have perks all the way up to including the newest perks from the Ring Killer when she comes out. So starting off, we've got a Nurse's Calling. It's actually pretty solid. Hag doesn't need a lot of information perks, but Nurses allows you to keep people from healing if they're anywhere in your range. And because Hag has a naturally smaller terror radius, there are situations where you will know that someone is healing, but they don't know you're nearby. So it's actually pretty decent. Agitation's also up there. Now, agitation serves dual purpose. One, it lets you hook somebody on a hook of your choice, which means you can get them deeper into your web or get them to a scourge hook if you're using those perks. But on top of that, because you carry faster, it takes you less time to carry. So even if you're just carrying to a close hook, the benefits of agitation is that you're not animation locked while you're carrying someone for as long, meaning it's harder to run around and break your web. Bamboozle, quite frankly, Hag doesn't chase. A perk like Bamboozle's absolutely bad on her. It's useless, but it's basically useless because she doesn't care about it. Barbecue is pretty far down here too, actually. I know a lot of people like running Barbecue for the bullet points, but Hag doesn't require the tracking that something like a perk like Barbecue provides. Beast of Prey, it's Beast of Prey. What do we There's not much to talk about here. Beast of Prey is not only a chaser perk, which is bad for Hag, but it's literally a meme perk for blood points. Bitter Murmur, same problem. Hag doesn't actually care about tracking. And not only this, but this is going to give you tracking only when generators are getting completed, which Hag can't do much to stop. Now, that's not to say that Hag doesn't defend generators, because she absolutely does. But suddenly getting a burst of tracking isn't going to change what you're doing. Blood Echo. Honestly, Hag doesn't really care about exhaustion either. It's just not a great perk on her. I'll bump it up to D because Hag does apply the damage really quickly to everyone around. And the exhausted status might help you with the occasional dead hard. But most times, actually, if you're on console, Blood Echo might be okay because of the delay in your teleport. But generally speaking, exhaustion's not a big problem for Hag. Blood Warden's not bad. It's I'll give Blood Warden C. If you get to endgame as Hag, it's really hard for people to save against you. And a lot of times you'll end up with a hook trade. So if the gates end up being open, the hook trade combined with Blood Warden might be enough to actually keep somebody from getting out. Bloodhound is just another one of those tracking perks that Hag just doesn't require to really do anything. Brutal, I know it seems weird putting Brutal up here, but because Hag is weakest in animation locks, although you don't frequently want to break pallets, breaking the pallets faster so you can teleport quicker in response to another trap getting set off is actually valuable. So Brutal does get some use here. Corrupt is absolutely S tier on Hag. Just straight up. It's a great perk in the first place, and then on top of that, it pushes people into you earlier, meaning you can get your lethality going sooner. And because you get your lethality going sooner, you get your first down sooner. Because you get your first down sooner, they don't have time to let the person hang and do gens, because they won't have enough gens done to really incorporate that playstyle. Call O'Brien is the new perk from the Ring Killer, and it's not bad. So Call O'Brien creates an anchor point, a position that the survivors want to come back to faster than they would like to come back to it. Because it acts like a temporary rune, they can't break it. They can't take it away like they can your totem from rune. And when you have a 3 or 4 gen situation, they'll know that the gens are regressing very, very quickly, so they'll want to get back to it as fast as they can, which can often cause them to make mistakes, set off traps, and then you can snowball off of that. Claustrophobia. It's got almost no use on Hag. She really doesn't care. And again, it's blocking windows and vaults when a generator is complete, which Hag doesn't really have much use for. Coulrophobia, ironically enough, despite the fact that Nurses is not bad for Hag because you can see where people are, it's just not a good perk on her because she just has a small tear radius, and you're hoping people are healing inside of it. It doesn't work out very well. Um, okay, coup de grace is weird. It's not great, but it is funny for the occasional time you actually get value out of it. It's just that extra lunge range, but typically speaking, if you set your traps properly, you won't actually need the increased range on it to get the hit, and you only get so many tokens in a game anyway, so it's still not great. Dead Man Switch. I wanted to like this. I wanted to like it. It's so good on so many killers, but on Hag, the problem is that you don't really have a way to get around the map to force people off of generators. The perks you typically use aren't typically going to force people off of generators frequently. And if they do let go of a generator to come, say, pressure the unhook, they're not going to get back to the generator likely before it would have kicked them off anyway. So it doesn't get a lot of value. Deadlock. Deadlock's really good on her, actually. It's kind of the perfect kind of slowdown for Hag. A generator is finished, it forcibly slows the game with each step, and she doesn't have to do anything for it. It just automatically slows the game down, and there's not anything the survivors can do to combat it. And Hag doesn't have to go out of her way to push people up with generators or do anything else. It's just slowdown free no matter what. Uh, Deathbound is pretty much down here. While it's nice to be undetectable as Hag, it's not that big a deal because, again, you're typically not chasing people around the map anyway. And you can use your terror radius as a tool to push people in the direction you want them to go. Because they'll try and move away from your terror radius when you're coming, not knowing that they're actually being pushed into a set of traps they don't know are there. So it exists is not great. Oh, Deerstalker. I love Deerstalker. Anytime anybody asks me what I would take for my 5th perk, it's always Deerstalker if I could have one. But it's not actually necessary on Hag at all. It's purely a quality of life buff for when you've got 4 people slugged at the end of a game and don't know where the crap they've crawled off to. Discordance is limited value. Again, if you've got your web set up and you're patrolling properly, you're not going to get a lot of value out of an information tracking perk. And even when you're down to a 3-gen, you're typically going to be trolling quick enough that it won't help you. It can sometimes get the occasional use, but it's going to be very, very situational. Distressing. Distressing is a main perk. It's good with some builds like Impossible Skill Check Doctor, things like that, but on Hag, there's no benefit to running it at all. Dragon's Grip. Not a bad perk. The expose is nice, but the cooldown is just so incredibly long. It's just too punishing for the cooldown. If this had a much shorter cooldown, it would easily be up in A or B tier for Hag, and for most killers actually. But with the cooldown being as long as it is, it's just not good. Now, Dying Light's actually one of the few slowdown perks that's pretty solid on Hag. Typically, you get down to 1 or 2 remaining gens. You'll often get a series of hooks, depending on how you're going. So Dying Light, while you don't really care about the early slowdown, which Dying Light's weak against anyway, towards the end of a game, that extra slowdown can mean that you're kicking that generator, especially combined with something like Call to Brine, can be really punishing. Enduring is C tier for the same reason that Brutal is. It's not necessarily about getting out of the pallet stun to get around and chase faster. It's about the fact that you can not be animation locked as long. Eruption's garbage. You don't traverse the map enough to kick enough gens to get a lot of value out of it. The slowdown that you do get isn't great for how much you're often going to apply it. And even with the incapacitated effect, it's just not enough frequency to really do you much good. The fact it does not have a crazy long cooldown, it's only 30 seconds, is nice. Especially when you do get the eruption effect and you kick them off a gen for 16 seconds. I'll give it D for that. But again, it's not going to be a huge benefit because you don't need a lot of slowdown. Now, while Brutal and Enduring up here, Fire Up is pretty much down here. It's nice to get the extra little effect for getting out of the slowdown or the stuns and stuff like that and pick up and everything else faster. Or sorry, vaults and pickups faster, but it's just not worth how much it takes to get going at that point. Force Penance. That's actually not bad. I'm gonna actually give Force Penance B. Now, it's not often people will take protection hits around Hag when you're thinking about around the map, but it's really, really, really common for people to end up taking a protection hit at the unhook. And while healing is very problematic, especially against Hag, especially in the current meta with things like Circle of Healing, Force Penance making someone broken so they can't heal makes it very dangerous for them to be moving around the map anywhere in your territory. Franklin's is S tier, just straight up. I know a lot of people talk about, oh, you can play around flashlights, and you can, and I will absolutely go over that in the guide. You can absolutely play around perks like Franklin's and everything else, or sorry, flashlights and everything else. But Franklin's brings such a quality of life buff to Hag that it's hard to explain. It's not just flashlights. You take away medkits, so now they actually have to go to find each other, or they have to use Circle of Healing to go heal, which means if they're using Circle of Healing, they have to go to a specific point on the map. That takes time. If they have a toolbox, whether it's a salvo box or one for doing generators, you're taking that tool away. If it's a styptic or a anthropic agent, or again, yes, flashlights, even like a key or something like a blood amber can get kind of annoying after a while. So just taking those tools away from survivors is so incredibly valuable. And it's not just, oh, I see 3 items in the pregame lobby. The amount of times that somebody will see a hag, and the first thing they do is go check every box they can to try and find a flashlight. This will make your game significantly better. Furtive chase, hag doesn't chase. A good hag will not chase you for more than 5 to 8 seconds, and she doesn't really have anything to benefit from having the reduced terror radius or the obsession swap. Gearhead, same kind of problem. Hag doesn't really get much out of gen tracking perks in general. It's something, at least, because it's you can actually see them when they don't know that you were there, but it's not going to be a really big deal with the way you end up patrolling around the map anyway. Grim Embrace is not bad. I'll give it C tier. The problem is that you need to hook each person, and because of the way Hag plays, it's more than possible for that Claudette to just sneak around the edges of the map and stay away from you and only do the gens away from you while the other 3 people get hooked. And by the time you even get her hooked, the game was already over, or they've got 2 gens left and 2 of them are dead. There are too many times you're just not going to get value out of it. Hangman's Trick, it's just not a great perk. Watch for sabos, watch for toolboxes. If you're worried about things like Sabo, or you're worried about things like Boilover with not being able to see hooks and everything else, just look for a hook first. Make sure there's no one else around before you start picking people up. Blood Favor, Hag doesn't chase, and typically she gets that first hit, and then you run. Unless you're like running into an open dead zone where she can get you in the next 5 to 8 seconds, it's not really worth chasing you, so a perk like this isn't going to get really any value in the first place. Same thing with crowd control. She doesn't really care if you go through vaults because she's not going to chase you around them anyway. Devour is pretty solid, which makes sense given it's one of her perks anyway. The only problem I have with totems is that if the totem spawns on the other side of the map, it's any other totem problem. It can just be gone. Even if you get a Devour and you get up to 3 stacks, if it's nowhere in an area that you want to predict, the RNG can just mean that it's just useless to you. Same problem with Haunted Grounds, same problem with Lullaby. Noah's actually good on her. Noah is good on Hag because people tend to do the generators outside your web, but they don't tend to take the time to do totems. Now, part of the reason for that is often you will have a totem inside your web where it's very hard for them to get to it to cleanse it while it's dull. So if you do get to endgame, the odds of them getting all 5 totems and you not getting Noah are very, very low. On top of that, because people tend to try to stay away from Hag rather than run into her web, it's really common for them to do the furthest gens away, and some teams will even wait out Corrupt and do all of the gens furthest away so that they have all 4 people alive and very little hooks left to try and break your 3 or 4 gen that you have. So Noah gives you that spike of lethality in the end game to actually make it very punishing to have that playstyle. Pentimento is not great on her. It's actually pretty terrible because at the end of the day, you have to traverse the map a lot for Pentimento to get value, and you have to be running enough totems to make people want to use it. Plaything is actually okay. I'll actually give Plaything to C. It's Oblivious for free. You just hook the person, and then it's also slow down for free because you have to go find the totem. It's going to make them run around the map a lot, which if their Plaything totem happens to be somewhere in your web, they can end up tripping traps because they're trying to find their totem, which can be useful. And unlike a lot of the other Oblivious or undetectable perks, it doesn't really require a lot of you other than just play the game, which is very, very nice to have. Retribution, on the other hand, she doesn't care. She doesn't really gain value out of the tracking. Um, you don't need to know where people are with an aura perk to know where people are. And if you're relying on an aura perk to know where people are, especially a totem that can just spawn in the wrong spot, it just doesn't do a lot of great. It doesn't do you a lot of good. Runes, you know what? I'm actually going to put Rune below these for the same problem. It's a totem. If it just spawns in a bad spot, you're just wrecked. It just doesn't do any good. Third Seal kind of gets destroyed by Swiss being a thing, and that's really it, to be honest. That and typically the people you will apply Third Seal to are often going to be the people that are in your web anyway. So you can hook someone who's you've down because they have Third Seal, and they can't see their teammates, but their teammates still know where they are, so it doesn't really matter. Thrill of the Hunt, again, not a big deal. She doesn't really care about totems, and that one's kind of just a reinforcement of a bad concept in this case. Same with Undying. They're just not... I'll give Undying up here, because it has some synergy with these, but generally speaking, they're just not the best things to have. Honestly, I wouldn't even put Undying there. I'll actually put Undying down in D tier. I'd rather run Rune by itself. I don't know, I put Lullaby up there. My bad. The expose on these can be actually useful. The slowdown, that can be useful, but like these are just no. Don't waste your time. Hoarder. Limitedly useful, especially if you're running Franklin's, to know when people have gone back with their items. But you can see the aura from an item that's dropped by Franklin's anyway, so all this is doing is giving you a notification for something you could have seen if you just looked. Hysteria. I tried to make this work a lot. I'm gonna put it on the same tier as here, C tier here with Plaything, because it's not uncommon for it to get some severe activation, and it does punish people for healing in that sense that you end up making everyone else oblivious whenever you proc it, which is nice. I'm all ears. You don't need it. Again, you're not really going to be chasing people through vaults anyway, so it doesn't get you a lot of value. Infectious Fright, same problem. You don't have a large terror radius. You don't have snowball potential that relies on your ability to chase people down. You know what? I'll give it D purely for the occasional time you can know if there's someone with a flashlight nearby, but it's not particularly great honor. And Insidious is F tier. There's no point to it. Brutal, I'm actually gonna put just below Agitation. Or not Brutal, words, Iron Grasp. Because Agitation has that speed boost that helps you get to a hook faster. While Iron Grasp does reduce wiggle and it can help in the similar fashion, it's not as effective as Agitation is. Iron Maiden's pretty much down here. It's nice for the exposed status, and also it can be nice when survivors are trying to hide from you inside your web and then they end up exposed. But it's hit and miss. Knockout's basically down here with where's Third Seal? Third Seal's down here, right? Yeah. Blind for looking. Yeah, because Third Seal's got the same problem as I guess I haven't done Third Seal yet. Having a moment. Either way, Knockout's not great for the same reason as anything else. It just gets countered by voice comms, which at higher MMRs, most people are using them. Well, not most people, but you'll get parties of 2 even, and that's enough to often be a counter to it. Lethal. It can be kind of useful sometimes to know where people have spawned in. If you have a 3-gen that spawned near you on certain maps and you wanted to protect it and you don't know that someone has spawned on the gen, especially if they hide from you early on, you don't need Lightborn. Mad Grit's not terrible as Hag because people do regularly will try and body block hooks. But again, it's kind of, you require teams to do that. It happens a bit more actually. I'll give it one up because people will try and unhook while you're carrying somebody. So if you've got one person on hook and you down somebody else, they'll try and unhook while you're carrying somebody, and this can be why you keep them on your shoulder to down the person who's getting the unhook and then trade off. Make your choice is solidly B tier. I know a lot of people really, really, really love Make Your Choice on Hag, and they swear by it. They say it's one of her best perks. I don't agree. I don't think Make Your Choice is actually all that phenomenal on her for two major reasons. One, you have to let the unhook happen on purpose. Hag is really good at keeping that from happening and forcing second stage and forcing death. She can basically proxy camp from up to 104 meters away with a green range add on. So there's not a lot of point in letting someone unhook for free. B, people tend to just go full immersive when they trigger Make Your Choice. So unless you're in the area close enough to try and punish the Make Your Choice, chances are very high they will literally crouch all the way out. It gives you a little bit of slowdown, but you're not going to typically proc the Make Your Choice against people who are paying attention. So just it doesn't help you very much. Perks a little bit over here. Mindbreaker, same thing. She doesn't really care about exhaustion, and the blindness isn't a big deal. Monitor's not bad. Monitor, especially combined with nurses, shrinking your terror radius. While Hag doesn't require undetectable to be effective, it does give her the ability to move around the map and not have people necessarily know exactly where she is. It can help you get set up a little bit early on, and it can help you get close enough to someone to spook them in a way they don't have time to react to. Now, you're not necessarily going to get a hit from your short terror radius directly, but being able to get closer means people don't have as many options as far as where they can move, and that can mean you can push them into your web easier. Again, even without monitoring, you can use your terror radius to kind of influence a similar effect, but it depends on where the pathing is. No, just, just no. Don't no. Usher Shrine, no. Nemesis also no. She doesn't care. No Way Out is kind of the same way as Blood Warden, where you get value in the end game by keeping people locked in with you longer. Oppression's not terrible, but unfortunately, again, she doesn't really need a ton of slowdown, and on top of that, the long cooldown and the fact the noise notification can be diminished by a skill check make it just really unreliable. Overcharge is the same problem. You have to kick a generator, it's a skill check, so it might not even go off, and it's not a crazy amount of regression for the effort. Now, the fact it doesn't have a cooldown is nice, but it can also only be applied to, I believe, one generator at a time anyway. I might be wrong about that. Overwhelming Presence. Hag doesn't have much of a terror radius, nor does she have a effect that particularly makes her strong. Play with your food. Hag doesn't chase. Play with your food does not give her a lot of value because she's not going to typically chase you enough to get value out of it. Pop is solid. Pop is pretty good on Hag, especially for holding a 3 or 4 gen at the end game. Being able to just cycle through the hooks and get people popping gens over and over and over again can be really demoralizing and very, very powerful. Predator, Hag doesn't chase. It doesn't do her a lot of good. It doesn't really matter. It's not effective on her really in any way. Rancor is actually pretty down here. The information throughout the game isn't powerful. The fact that survivors see you frequently every time a gen gets done isn't great for you either, because it can tell people where you are and where you're trying to set traps and what you're trying to set up. And while the expose is great, you don't really have a way of forcing the obsession to be someone you go after endgame. You don't want to chase them anyway, so it's not really that strong. Remember Me goes up here with these for the same reason. It locks them into the game with you longer, which gives you more opportunities to do things. Save the Best for Last is pretty A tier. Now, I'm not a fan of Save the Best for Last, but it is a good perk on Hag. The reason I'm not a fan of Save the Best for Last is that if you space your traps out properly, you will have someone hit a trap, you will swing and hit them, and by the time you go through the attack hit animation recovery, they will then hit the next trap in the sequence. So you don't need Save the Best for Last if you set your traps up properly. More than that, but because Save the Best for Last changes your recovery time, you either end up with dead time because you set your traps properly, or you don't have enough stacks yet for where you've placed your traps because your memory for distance is wrong based on using it or not, and you end up with a situation where you can't react to the trap because you set them too close for the amount of stacks you currently have. So you always want to set them at the appropriate distance, assuming you didn't have Save the Best for last. This also means you spread your web wider, which means you have a much greater lethality rate in a larger area of threat. So Save the Best for last is really only good about getting you out of the animation lock sooner, which is, again, good for Hag anyway, and also in the rare circumstances where people are hitting your traps not in sequence in so many different places at the same time that the couple of fractions of a second it saves you is enough to get the extra couple hits. It's very, very niche, but when it works, it's very, very good. It's just niche. Scourge Hook is okay. It's some slowdown, people will heal, and then it's gen slowdown. But again, you don't really need a lot of slowdown on Hag. She's actually quite powerful without it. She relies more on lethality than she does necessarily slowdown. Though, and again, you might just not have any Scourge Hooks anywhere near you. There's only 4 on the map anyway, so not great. Alternatively, Pain Resonance is actually not bad. Although it still requires a Scourge Hook, the fact that it provides slowdown anywhere on the map is really, really solid. Now, I know that seems weird when you're comparing it to Gift of Pain, but you know what? They both have a similar effect, but the problem is Gift of Pain only works until they're injured again, and Hag injures people like crazy. Whereas Scourge Hook is every time you down somebody, you get that 15% regression on the gen that you needed on the most, no matter where it is on the map. That's really strong when you have somebody on hook and they're trying to slam gens, and you get somebody onto a hook, diminish the gen, and now they take even longer, so they have even less time to try and get that gen done before they would have to do the unhook or trade. That's something that Gift of Pain just doesn't quite give you. Shadowborn. If you need it to see, you can, I know a lot of people get motion sick without it, but otherwise it's not required. It doesn't do any good. Sloppy Butcher is pretty A tier. Just keeping people injured longer, especially with the nerfs to Circle of Healing, making it so that this is actually relatively effective. Anyone who is injured, of course, can go down in one hit. Hag does not have insta-down outside of perks. So keeping people injured longer and making it take longer to heal, which again also means they can't come back and unhook as quickly or pressure your traps as fast, is still very, very good, even in a Circle of Healing meta. It's still a strong perk. Spies, Hag doesn't care about tracking. Spirit Fury, Hag doesn't care about chase. Starstruck, I stand by this. Starstruck is Hag's best perk. It does everything you need it to do. So, with Starstruck on Hag, one of the most common counterplays to Hag is when you pick up somebody, the rest of the survivors will run around and break as many traps as you can. It's why Agitation is good on Hag, is because it actually gets you to the hook faster to mitigate the damage that they will do to your web in the time you were carrying. Starstruck threatens insta-down to anyone within the 24-meter carry radius that you have by default. Now, either they run away, which buys you your web not getting destroyed, and 30 seconds of the time that the survivor's on the hook, anyone who's exposed doesn't want to try and trade. So they leave your web alone, and you get a ton of hook pressure by virtue of they don't have enough time to wait to move slowly to try and sneak through your web when you cut the time the person's going to be on the hook in half. Well, a quarter if you're talking to death, but half for at least a single stage. This means you can force them to make mistakes earlier because they don't have time to go slowly to avoid your traps when they're trying to get back to the unhook. This can lead to some heavy snowball. If they don't leave, then you can very, very quickly snowball off of the exposed status effect and just having a competent web placement. Even if the people who get exposed do leave, and someone else comes to the save, whatever that person was doing, they now have to get off a gen, they have to stop healing, they have to stop doing whatever it is they wanted to do to now cross the map from outside of your terror radius to then come and try and unhook. They still have to get through your web, but now you've got people who are moving away from you because they're exposed, trading with someone who is further away. So nobody is doing anything but moving. They're not doing gens, they're not doing totems, they're not doing healing, they're just moving. It's a total waste of time for them, which makes Starstruck fantastic on Hag. Also, again, when people try and do things like body block, Starstruck kind of puts that to bed really, really quickly. Strider. It's it wasn't great on Hag before the nerf, and after the nerf, it's completely useless. Um, Surge or Jolt. I love the idea of this perk. I hate having to kick generators. The cooldown and the limitations on the range just make it not quite enough. On some maps, you can actually get a lot of value out of it, especially on small maps like the game. But on too many maps, even your 3 gen is too far apart for you to get value out of Jolt reliably. Surveillance, Hag just doesn't care about the tracking. She just doesn't. Beast of Prey, same thing. Thana is actually not bad. Thana is pretty solid slowdown on her. Actually, I would even go as far as putting it in A tier. Now, because Hag tends to injure people quickly, Thana gets value very, very well. And again, it comes back to that same idea with things like Sloppy, where when you have somebody on hook, anything you do to make gens take longer to finish, or healing to take longer with things like Sloppy, anything that wastes survivors' time, means they don't have that time to take to kind of get through your web to try and get through the unhook. So it's really, 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 really good to do anything that messes with their time scale so that they don't have time to move slowly. Hag is about making people make mistakes. And if they've got all the time in the world, they won't make the mistake. They'll just take their time. You've got to make sure they don't have the time to give. Thrilling Tremors, again, not a big deal. You don't really care about the tracking. It's not going to do you a lot of good. And the slowdown only applies if they let go of the generator, at which point you're not going to be pressuring them off the generator, so it doesn't really get you much value. Tinker's kind of in the same boat. You don't really a lot of slowdown. The undetectable is nice because it can get you a couple of hits here and there, but it's realistically only going to be 5 to 7 times per match. Occasionally, if you're comboing a pop, you might get extra value in like a 3 gen, but it's just not amazing. Trail of Torment, ironically enough, is not good. You would think it would be with the undetectable and the ability to get around and get the hit a little bit sooner, but because she gets hit so quickly and because so many of them are from her traps, it tends to lose its effect because of a trap hit, but not because you got a hit from undetectable. So you get 0 value out of it. Unnerving Presence, same problem. You've got a small terror radius, you don't get a lot of value out of it. It's just not really great. Unrelenting is not actually as bad as you would think. It's still kind of a meh perk, because at the end of the day, if you teleport and swing instantly and whiff, it does get you out of the animation sooner, but that requires you missing. And you know what, even I do it still, but not enough to require a perk slot or for it to even be worthwhile. Now, I know on console, the extra lag can mean that you frequently will whiff hits if you swing immediately. So it might be better on someone who's playing Hag on console, but for a PC, if you've got like 30, 50 ping, you shouldn't really need it. Whispers, Hag doesn't care about tracking. Just does straight up. Zenchen Tactics, doesn't care about tracking or chasing you. What else we got here? Oh, Floods of Rage, here we go. Tracking, Hag doesn't care. Merciless Storm. Merciless Storm is the same problem. She's got no way of pushing you off the gen, and even if you get off the gen, it's not doing you any big deal. Yes, it's got the skill checks to try and push you off, but the reality is that any survivor with more than like 500 hours is going to hit those skill checks without even really trying to. And that actually brings us to the end of it. That is pretty much the perk list for Hag as far as strength goes. And if you've got any questions, you can ask them down below. Okay, so now we're going to go over the survivor perks and how they impact Hag and whether or not she cares about a lot of them. This shouldn't take terribly long, but we'll breeze through it as quickly as we can here. Ace in the Hole, doesn't care. Straight up doesn't care. Adrenaline you actually have to watch out for. Adrenaline is not terribly against Hag because she often will slug. So a last minute adrenaline play in a Swift can rob you of all of your pressure. If they finish that last generator when you've got 2 or 3 people slugged and say 1 person on the hook, that last person finishes the gen. The only way you can really play around adrenaline in that situation is making sure that A, just because you have people slugged, don't make sure to keep your web set up so that if they do get that last second adrenaline proc, they still have a high chance of hitting a trap on the way out. And remember, they're injured if they're from slugged, not fully healthy. If it's off the unhook, really all I can tell you is get the grab. I'm sorry, there's not much else I can tell you there. Um, Also, this is why I will frequently hook people to progress game state. Because it's all well and good to end a game with 3 people slugged and 1 person on the hook. But for every time you try and do that, there'll be plenty of times it doesn't work out that way. And if you had just hooked people as you went as much as you possibly can, you would have killed 2 or 3 of them and you would have never been in that situation in the first place. Aftercare you don't care about. Alert you don't care about. You don't break pallets very often as Hag anyway, so you don't get a lot of value out of that. You also don't kick gens terribly often or break. You almost never break breakable walls. So alert won't provide the survivors with a ton of information. Um, any means necessary. Same kind of situation, really. You don't really care about the palette reset because you don't do enough of it to matter. Now, appraisal is actually not bad against Hag. It does mess with the time economy a little bit for survivors, which you have to be careful of. But being able to get multiple items, especially if the Hag isn't running Franklins and you can get multiple flashlights for your team, can really change how a match plays out. Autodidact is generally a meme perk. If they get the stacks, which they technically will have time to try in most situations, because you're not often going to be interrupting healing as a Hag, it's still RNG, and there's so many better healing perks, it just doesn't matter. Babysitter, hey, if they want to show you who they are, what their aura is when you get off hook, good for them. You don't really care. Balance landing gets limited use against Hag. If you've set your traps properly, usually most of the problematic drop downs they would land and hit a trap on the way down. And because Hag's traps actually activate a 360-degree sphere, you actually set a trap off before you hit the ground. So even with balanced landing, if both parties have low ping, you will teleport and hit them before they've actually made contact with the ground for balance to even kick in. So it doesn't actually do them any good. Solidarity, or not Solidarity, what's this one called here? They're all out of order on my sheet, unfortunately. But we used to be Solidarity. It also doesn't matter. Bite the Bullet, it can be nice if you're healing inside of a web and you're trying to make sure that the Hag doesn't catch you, but it's not going to get you a ton of value. Blood Pact, same issue, which doesn't really care. Boilover is actually pretty strong. Even after the nerfs, making sure the Hag cannot choose your hook as reliably, on top of the fact that it keeps you on the Hag's shoulders longer, which makes it hard for the Hag to teleport if she's stuck in animation lock, so your team has more time to break traps, is really, really handy. So as a Hag, to try and play around Boilover, before you pick somebody up, especially if you suspect they have Boilover, look for the nearest hook, and also keep in mind things like Sabo boxes. So that's the only one you have to play around there. With Appraisal, it's just gotta watch for the items. If you've got Franklins, then you can kind of burn through the items that way. If somebody steps around a corner and vanishes, and they've been injured, check for Bite the Bullet. You don't care about Bond. Circle of Healing. They're the one everyone complains about. So, it's an S tier perk against Hag. It is. And everyone thinks it's game breaking and that Circle of Healing killed Hag. They're wrong. Circle of Healing, while a very, very strong perk, makes survivors predictable. You know where they're going to run. You know exactly how they're going to get there. And every time they change the totem location, you can keep that in mind as well. So typically, because you know where they're going to go once they get hit, what good survivors will do is they'll probe your web trying to get in to get a gen. You'll teleport, they'll hit a trap, you'll teleport, you'll hit them, they'll run back the way they came to where the Circle of Healing is, and they'll heal up and they'll do it again. It makes it very hard to get downs. The counterplay to this is to use the fact that they are predictable against them. So when you see that they keep running back to the same spot, let somebody pass you. Let them pass by your physical body to go in towards your web. Then trap the path that you see them take going back towards the boon. Then, when they hit a trap in your web and you teleport and hit them, They run back to try and get back to their boon, pathing in a predictable fashion, and end up hitting a trap that you specifically left for when they ran to run back to the Circle of Healing. You can use Circle of Healing to bait survivors into their own death. That's why Circle of Healing is not the be all end all against Hag. A good Hag player will learn to use it against the survivors. Anytime you are predictable as a survivor against Hag, you've made mistakes. Shadow Step, it's kind of a nuisance, but again, Hag doesn't really chase that much, so it's not a big deal. Borrowed Time is effective against Hag. Personally, I typically just BT check, because then the person goes amends, and then I can pursue the other person. So it buys me time on that way. It buys me time for the unhooked person to have to go mend. And although I lose the distance in the chase against the person who successfully managed to unhook, they are trying to get out of my web. They have to take very specific pathing to do so unless they found a route that does not require any crouching or any traps. If that's the situation, then you kind of made a mistake as the Hag anyway. So typically they have crouched in, and now when you're chasing them, they're going to hit traps on the way out. So you don't need to immediately be on them on the unhook like you would with a lot of other killers, because you're going to make that distance up through trap usage. So it's better to make the other person mend. Botany is actually pretty solid against Hag. Anything that makes you heal faster is strong against Hag, because Hag does not have instant down base kit. She requires on getting the 2-hit down. She needs you to do that. Ironically enough, Breakdown's kind of a pain in the ass. Because Breakdown makes it so that the hook the person got hooked from is dead for 3 minutes. If that hook happens to be, say, a Scourge hook in the middle of your web, it can be really problematic, especially combined with perks like Boil Over. If you suspect someone has Breakdown, or you've been shown that they have Breakdown, try to be more cautious about where you hook them, even if it means hooking them towards the edge of your web where they're easier to be saved. It's better to have them easier to be saved, but you have the ability to hook other people when you down them deeper into your web towards your gens that you care about, than it is for them to be hard to save, but then kill a hook you need. Breakout's just not a big deal. Typically, people won't want to run near you if you're running appropriate perks. Perks like Starstruck make this kind of a null issue. If people are staying near you, just slug. If you have someone who's chasing along behind you or you're right beside you, there's a very good chance they have Breakout, unless they're trying to physically get in your way to body block. Drop the person you're carrying, slug them, and apply pressure to the person who's trying to get you. A slug survivor is still down. Buckle up, you don't care. Built to last, you don't care. It's there's no playing around it. You just grind through it like you would anything from Appraisal. Actually, I'll give it to up here for as far as it being good for Survivor. Calm Spirit, you don't care. What is this even called? I never remember some of these perks names because I killer main. Clairvoyance, you don't really care. Boon Holding, you don't care. Dance with Me, you don't care because you don't chase. Dead Hard is still a good perk, no matter what. It's still solid against anybody, including Hag. With Hag, a lot of times, depending on ping, Dead Hard can allow them to Dead Hard away from a trap that they've set off. If the pings are very, very tight, you'll actually teleport and hit them before they have time to Dead Hard. But I'm still going to put Dead Hard... You're not going to put Dead Hard up in S. Dead Hard is one of the very few perks that can actually... It's one of the only exhaustion perks that can make you miss a hit as Hag. There's very few that matter. Deja Vu, you don't care. Dark Sense, you don't care. Kindred actually matters a little bit, because people can see how you're moving and setting up traps around the hook placement. But if you spread your traps out properly, you shouldn't really have more than like one around the hook, and there shouldn't be anyone else really within Kindred's range most times. Maybe at an odd angle here and there, but generally it's not a problem, because you want your traps to be far enough away that when you hit somebody, you have time to go through the animation recovery before they would get to the hook anyway, where they would set off the second trap. So you don't actually want your traps to be very close to the hook, aside from one directly under it, where people predict it anyway. Hag doesn't really care about decisive, honestly. You just eat it. Like, If you down someone and you suspect they have decisive, just eat it. It doesn't really matter. Deliverance is F tier against Hag. Because if you Kobe or Deliverance against Hag, part of the animation for it causes you to land standing. Now, when you're unhooked as a survivor, you can actually crouch. You can hold the crouch button, and the person who's unhooking you can hold the crouch button, and the trap won't go off. But with both Deliverance and a 4% Kobe attempt, you actually land, and as part of the animation, you'll set the trap off. This is a useless perk against Hag. What else we got here? Pebble's S tier. Always. No, seriously though. Hag doesn't chase you, so Pebble doesn't really do a lot of value. Same with Empathy, Distortion. Fixated, you doesn't really do you a lot of good because you actually need to crouch, not walk. For the people is actually pretty solid because of how often a Hag will slug. Now, the trick with this as a Hag is basically to just make sure that if you see someone running towards the down slug, choose who you're going to go for. If you want to, the best bet is usually to try to re-down the person that is being for the peopled, because there's still an animation for them standing up. So there's a little bit of locomotion where they actually have to stand up before they're going full speed. So you have the highest chance of re-downing that person. And then you can pursue the person who for the people since they're now broken. Flashbang, just look up. Fast track, it's a gen speed buff, but it's not enough of one to really be an issue. Hag doesn't care about head on or Iron Will. Inner Strength is actually kind of nice because then you can actually heal up against it. There's not much you can really do about it as a Hag. It's just there. It's just a free heal that they get a couple times. Hope is not terrible. I still gotta go with an F. It's still not great because at the end of the day, while the speed boost can help counteract Noed, which is frequently taken by Hag, you're not gonna outrun a trap with it, so it's not gonna save you. Left Behind, Hag doesn't care about. Detective's Hunch, Hag doesn't care about. Flip Flop is actually really good against Hag. Like arguably very, very good against Hag. Because Hags very frequently will slug because people set up traps and they end up teleporting around and slugging 2 or 3 people at once. And when she comes back for you, there's only so many hooks in the area that she's in. So Flip Flop can actually be the reason you get off because she'll leave you, you recover up to 50%, and then she just can't get you to a hook that she thought she could. So it's actually pretty solid against her. Lightweight doesn't matter. And for Hags trying to play against this, don't get greedy with your hooks. It's gonna bite you when it happens, but as long as you make sure to reset your web properly before you bother picking up, it won't matter. They'll wiggle off and they'll hit a trap trying to get away from you anyway. Lucky Break, you don't track, so it doesn't matter. Medal of Man, it's like borrowed time. You kind of just eat it. No Mither is just hook the person. No Mither, weirdly enough, is actually not as bad against Hag as you would expect. Yes, you are an insta-down, but if she's teleporting around slugging quickly, she doesn't necessarily have the ability to get back to you fast enough to prevent you from getting up. But counterplay to No Mither, just hook the person, so there's not much to say there really is Hag. Lythe, Hag doesn't care. What else we got here? Wait, Guardian. I keep forgetting they changed some of these names on perks, so I'm trying to jump around a little bit. Hope. Yeah, Inner Healing. Kindred. Kinship. It's nice to have the ability to pause the timer, but you have to be so incredibly close as Survivor for Kinship to do anything that the Hag's likely to find you there anyway. So it's still just kind of an F tier perk, unfortunately, because of the range restrictions on it. They don't really have to worry about it as a Survivor or as a killer. Leader is just a healing buff against Hag. It's not bad. as Hag, there's nothing you really do about it. You know people will double up in the same area to heal, which is kind of the default nature of that anyway. No One Left Behind is not going to be really big. When it does come into play, you have to watch because it can throw off your timing to try and protect a hook in the end game if it gets that far. But that's really the only thing you have to watch for. Okay, Object of Obsession is not bad. Now, as Survivor, it means you get to see where the hag is, you can see where she's trying to set up, and you can also periodically see when she is placing traps, so where they are. The counterplay to this as killer is A, move around a lot, don't just sit in one spot. People associate hag with staying in one area, but at the end of the day, you can threaten like 100-meter plus area across. Move. On top of that, you see the survivors when they see you, which means you can place traps in areas where the survivor will want to come break the trap during that 3-second window that they see you. And then you place another trap that they don't see that will go off when they go to mess with the first one you placed. Now, obviously, you only need to do this if they show that they are messing with your traps, or if they're dodging them. You can place a trap that they'll only hit because they're trying to dodge the one they saw you place. So use these as lure traps, and that's the counterplay for Object as Hag. Off the record, Hag doesn't care. She doesn't really run aura reading anyway. Same with most of these, honestly. Let's limit these down a little bit. Prove Thyself you actually have to watch for because you can slam the gen faster than Hag's prepared for it. Quick and Quiet, she doesn't care. Red Herring, Russian. Saboteur is actually not bad. The same problem as Breakdown is it actually messes up a little bit. Self-care is not good against Hag. It takes so long for one person to self-care, and you need to be getting things done, or else you're going to just fall apart. Sprint Burst, Hag doesn't care. Windows, Hag doesn't care. Will Make it's actually pretty strong. The ability to heal people off hook so that you're not injured and trying to escape is really strong. The fact that it lasts a minute so you can be kind of a miniature heal bot for a little bit is actually really, really good. Unfortunately, as Hag, it's similar to Botany. There's not much you can really do to prevent it. You just have to understand that there's going to be heal pressure. Streetwise, she doesn't care. Spine Chill, she doesn't really care. Soul Guard can be somewhat problematic, but only in a situation where you're mass slugging and they're getting each other up with things like 4 other people or anything else. And the counterplay to Soul Guard is literally count to 9. You hit 9, you swing. But oftentimes I'll just go for the other person who wasn't slugged. Babysitter, she doesn't care. Wake Up, she doesn't care. Unbreakable is pretty S tier against Hag, honestly. The ability to unslug yourself when you've been slugged by a Hag is really, really, really good. If No Wither didn't have the self-harm to it, it would be much higher, but it'll just make the Hag take the time and hook you instead. But Unbreakable is actually very, very good against her. Urban Evasion. I hate to say it. I hate saying this, but Urban Evasion is actually S tier against Hag. It's really annoying, actually. Like, very, very, very annoying dealing with it as Hag. What else we got here? Small game, Hag doesn't care. Slippery Meat, you can try and Kobe yourself, but again, it's F tier against Hag because it's the same problem. You Kobe or you 4% off the hook, you immediately land on the trap, she teleports back and instantly redowns you. Technician, she doesn't care. Soul Survivor, she doesn't care. Smash Hit, doesn't care. She's not going to chase you anyway. What else we got here? Stakeout is nice for the extra gen speed, but she's got such a small terror radius that it's actually going to be hard to get value, especially because she teleports around the map so frequently. But it's not useless. Tenacity is not bad, actually. Because of how often she slugs, you can usually use tenacity to get away from where you've been downed and get out of her web. Whereas without tenacity, it just takes you so long to get out of your web and to try and recover that people don't typically have the time to come help you. What else we got here? Visionary. Hag doesn't care. We're Gonna Live Forever is actually really good against Hag. Because it gives you the ability to pick up slugs quickly. And as for tenacity, like most of these perks countering his Hag is just hook the person or be aware that it exists. So, you know, if you see people on gens doubling up, expect the gen to go faster than you think. We're Gonna Live Forever. Don't overslug. Take the hooks if you need them. Same thing with Will Make It. Don't be surprised if people heal very quickly. A lot of these don't really have counterplay other than just keep applying pressure. Urban is one of the few that there isn't strict counterplay to as Hag. It's not a popular perk, but when it does come up, it's really irritating. And unfortunately, it's one of the very few situations where you'll be forced to chase someone to force them out of Urban, so they actually have to run. The benefit to that, though, is that because they've typically used Urban to get into your web, they haven't set any traps off, and now that you're actually applying pressure to them directly and they have to try and they have to run to get out, usually they go down very, very quickly because they hit all of the traps that they didn't even know were necessarily there. They just avoided them. What else we got here? Sorry, bear with me while I look for all of the icons for the perks that are not in the correct order. Let this out after. Overcome, Hag doesn't care. Rookie Spirit? Where is it? Not Rookie Spirit. Hag doesn't care. Self-preservation, Hag does not care. Resurgence is actually pretty solid. For the same reasons as things like Will Make It. Anything that lets you get healthy before you have to try and leave the web is really good. And again, as Hag, there's not really counterplay to this. It's just be aware of its existence. It's really all you can do. Unfortunately, a lot of Survivor perks do not have counterplay that is not just play better somehow. These at least do in the way that they function. Up the ante, nobody cares. Hag doesn't care. Power Struggle is not bad against Hag because she does typically have to carry you to set locations, and she often reuses the same hooks, and she doesn't typically break pallets or chase. So because she doesn't break pallets very often and doesn't chase very often, that means there's usually a fair amount of pallets that are actually up on the map. So you can use that to try and save yourself, especially combined with things like flip-flop. That being said, it's still kind of meh. As a Hag, just don't walk through pallets if you think the person might have enough wiggle progress to get off. There's not really much other than that to do. Premonition, she doesn't care. Buckle Up, she doesn't care. Flashbang, she doesn't care. Like most of these perks just don't really affect her at all. Parental Guidance, she doesn't care. Empathetic Connection. Oh, again, there's nothing you can do about it. It's a good perk against Hag because it lets you heal up and people know where you are to come find you to get heals. But it's 10% extra healing. There's nothing Hag can do about it. There's no counterplay for her. It's just there. Yeah. Desperate Measures, same thing. Hag, by virtue of the way she plays, is going to apply pressure to multiple targets. So Desperate Measures allowing you to heal very, very quickly and get the unhooks faster is actually fairly powerful. But again, unfortunately, there's not counterplay for the Hag. Sorry, I called this Buckle Up. It's not Buckle Up, it's Deception. Which, again, Hag doesn't chase, so it still doesn't matter. Oh, Corrective Action, Hag doesn't care. Boon Exponential is actually very, very, very good against Hag. This would actually be the one I was afraid of far more than Circle of Healing. Like, way over Circle of Healing. Like, these are not necessarily in order. These are just kind of the order I pulled them. But exponential against Hag is very, very strong because she typically has a very slug heavy playstyle. So of the two, I'm more afraid of exponential than I am circle of healing. Now, at the same time, again, exponential still means they have to go to a specific place, and they're going to be slugged, so they're going to have to crawl there. So at least you have some idea where they might be trying to go to get up, but you can't trap them off with traps the way you can with circle of healing to bait them into that. They're going to just crawl away. So you are forced to hook people, even when slugging would be the better choice, if you know that this boon is on the map, basically anywhere on your side of the map. Even if it's not on your side of the map, the fact that survivors have such a large area to crawl across in a lot of maps means, yes, it'll take them time to get there, but the odds of you finding them when you have to leave your web and the gens you're trying to protect to cross the map to some random location to try and hope you find the slug along the way, it's not worth your time. So you're now forced to hook even when slugging would be optimal, because otherwise they're going to just crawl away and reset. So it's actually a fairly large problem. Way, way, way more than circle healing is. This isn't happening. Hag doesn't care. Oh, Dark Theory. Hag's not going to care. She's not chasing you through haste, so it doesn't matter anyway. This is renewal now. Not bad. It's not going to do a lot against Hag. I'll give it down here in D tier because it does have some value. The reason I say it's not a lot of value is because although it does heal you off a hook, it forces you to be broken for the first, 20 seconds or so when you're at the most vulnerable. So it's combined with something like borrowed time, it might be useful to try and get out from an unhook, but generally it's not going to help you a lot. Solidarity. Same thing, it's not a bad perk against Hag because it does let you heal up quicker, so that you can't snowball as hard, but as a Hag, there's not really anything you can do about it, it just exists. So perks that actually matter up here, you've got the Unbreakable Totem you actually have to pay attention to. Circle of Healing, use it as bait. Streetwise, you have to figure out that somebody's... Or not Streetwise, Urban Evasion, you have to figure out that someone's using it. Force them to run and understand that if they're running, they're typically inside your web, so they're going to go down. Dead Hard, you're baiting it out. Oftentimes, if someone dead hards away from me, I'll literally drop the chase on the spot. It's not worth chasing them unless I can get them before they get to a powder window. Hence 5 to 8 seconds. Flip flop, once you're aware of it, don't get greedy with your hooks. Try and hook as close as you can. Unbreakable, either re-down people clean through it or hook. Sometimes it's worth it to slug the person, even if you know they have Unbreakable, and let them Unbreakable and burn it so you can re-down them, than it is to take the time to hook them in a situation where you have multiple traps going off. Adrenaline, towards end game, start making sure you hook people. Actually, hook people as you go if you can. Unless, again, you're at a point where it's like, wow, there's 3 gens left and you've got 1 person on hook and 2 people slugged and you can see the last person and they're injured. At that point, just go down that person. Boil over, check for nearby hooks first. If you do have to make a drop, try and make the drop very, very quickly so they get minimal value out of the percentage increase. Borrowed time, honestly, just swing through it. Botany has no counterplay. For the people, typically aim for the person who's being for the people since they'll be temporarily animation locked, so it's easier to hit them. Will make it. You won't have counterplay other than trying to go back to the hook faster. There's not really a lot you can do against this other than be aware that it exists. We're Gonna Live Forever will heavily counter a slugging playstyle. So again, make sure that if you see people getting up really, really quickly, prioritize hooking more than slugging, even for pressure. And same with the rest of these healing perks. It's the same idea. It's just you need to just apply pressure and understand that there's not really a direct counter because that's why we're in a healing meta. Prove thyself, same thing. You see 2 people on a gen, you might want to push them off that gen sooner than you would expect because they might be getting it done faster than things. Saboteur, watch for Sabo plays. Be prepared to slug the person you were carrying if they have an early Sabo. If it's a last second Sabo, they might just get you, but those are hard to pull off. Tenacity, things like that. Make sure they, if you see them crawling away, don't let them crawl far. Just pick them up right away. DS, just eat it. Breakdown, make sure you hook on the outside of your web rather than center of your web so you have usable hooks. Kindred, make sure you're placing your traps spread properly and you won't have an issue there. Most of these perks come down to either there's not much you can do or you just don't care. There's not a lot of perks survivors run that Hag actually has to pay attention to. And the ones that you have to be aware of, a lot of them there's no actual counterplay. You just have to be aware of their existence because it'll mess with your timing in the game otherwise. But as far as like actual ability to counter it, either there's zero counterplay with like a lot of the healing perks, or it forces you to hook more rather than slugging, which is fine. But there's not a lot you can do in a lot of these situations other than just play through it. Unfortunately, there is a very, very large pool of survivor perks that the killer has absolutely no interaction with whatsoever. Not just Hag, just in general. But that should be it for all the survivor perks. Unfortunately, as you can see, most of them, as much as there are survivor perks that killers can't do much about, there's a lot of survivor perks that some killers just don't care about, which is where you get a drastically minimized survivor pool of perks that are usable as well. So it's not much fun for them either. That being said, though, on to the next segment. If at this point you are still here, congratulations. You know far more about Hag than most people would ever care to. I will leave you with some closing tips in general, though, to go along with our wonderful girl Lisa here. Primarily, don't break breakable walls. Ever. Almost ever. You want to leave them up so that you can force survivors to move in predictable ways. The more you can move a survivor around the map in a fashion that you can predict, the better you'll be able to trap. So you don't want to open up additional pathways. As for pallets, typically speaking, you don't need to break a lot of pallets during chase. Now, I clarify that as during chase because what you'll want to do is someone is about to drop a pallet. As you approach the pallet, place a trap. They'll typically drop the pallet because at that point they don't have a choice. And as you run the loop, either they have to leave the loop or they'll vault the pallet into the trap. If they leave the loop, you typically break chase at that point. You don't want to chase a survivor for more than about 5 to 8 seconds unless you have all of your traps down and have recently patrolled your gens to know that no one has snuck in behind you by crouching. So typically speaking, you can place a trap at the pallet and then chase them off of it, and then the next survivor who ends up trying to run ends up hitting that trap because they see the pallet as a safe point and they gravitate towards it. Once again, survivors make predictable pathings. Predictable pathing makes easy traps, easy hits. There's not a lot that you really need to know beyond this. Now, there are things you will learn here and there, but by and large, at this point, you have all of the raw information you need, and now it's how well can you figure out where people are going to move. Heat traps and anchor traps are kind of the perfect examples of knowing when to modify where you place traps based on survivor actions. If you ever come across survivors who are very, very good, who actually are actively watching you to place traps, you will need to learn to fake placing them so that they cannot determine which ones you have actually placed and which ones are fake. This is where things like lure traps come into place and blind traps come into place because you'll need to use them to effectively combat better teams. That being said, if you have any other questions or if there is anything else you want to learn or you are not sure about, I'm live on Twitch every day except for Thursday and Friday from 6:30 p.m. EST and on. And there is a link to my socials below, including my Discord and my TikTok and my Twitter. Feel free to come on out, ask a question. I love teaching people about Hag, as evidenced by me taking the time to build this entire thing. That being said, thank you for all of those who have stuck it out to the end. It is greatly appreciated. But with that, it is officially closing time. Good night.